Big LEZ'S League, an all rugby league experience.
Hello, welcome back to Big LEZ'S League, an all rugby league experience. I'm your host, Big Les. Welcome to the free agent watch. We're going to be going through all of the current free agents, including some of the big stars that have just been put into the free agent market, and then obviously some of the guys you might not know about as well and where they could land going into the 2025 season. No, these aren't the guys that are going off contract at November 1, which is obviously already passed. These are the guys that are off contract right now that could go to a club next year that haven't been picked up yet. As I said, it includes some of those stars like Gutho, Ben Hunt, Josh Addo-Carr, Terrell May. We're going to talk about all of those guys and where they could end up. And then we'll also touch on a few guys that you might not know about. That if you've seen the Instagram, you would have seen that they've been posted about on there. And we'll talk about where they could land as well, and including a few other ones that I sort of didn't know still didn't have a contract either. One other one in particular from the Dragons that I had no idea was currently off contract, or at least according to Zero Tackle, is off contract. But let's get straight into it. The first one, we'll start off with the Roosters' Terrell May, obviously released effective immediately. No one knows as to why that was. Obviously, a lot of Roosters guys and Terrell May himself claimed that it wasn't due to any off-field incidents, and I don't think it was either. I think that they are just clearing space to get a bigger star over the next 2 years, which is somewhat fair enough. It is a harsh business. Terrell May was in great form and was the impact player of the year for the RPLA as well. So for him to get the boot was a huge call, and obviously a lot of people disagreed with it. But, they are sort of making ways for some bigger stars. We did a podcast on that on the Spotify, Apple podcast, going through Terrell May obviously being released, and then obviously another podcast talking about Brandon Smith and talking about as well that tinfoil hat theory regarding what could happen at the Roosters and who they could go for over the next 2 years. If you want to listen to that, make sure to head over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts. The link tree will be below. But yeah, look, I mean, it does look like the Roosters are clearing spaces for those type of stars. So in the end, while it is harsh to a player that's played so well this season, obviously it is a business and the Roosters are making ways for that star in the future. But where could Terrell May end up? I think that for me at least, and I know that there were some sour negotiations when he was off contract previously at the start of last year, but I think that he could end up at the Dogs. I really do like him ending up at the Dogs. As I said, I know there were some sour negotiations there initially with him, but I just think he'd be a good fit there. He's exactly what they need. He's a big, tough front rower, but also he has that ability to offload. He has so many layers in his game as well, which just makes him a multi-dimensional threat too there in the front row. The things that I'd have to improve on going over to the Doggies, and I'm sure he would, just get into that culture of the toughness and the working hard for each other. But for me, just hitting the line a little harder, not going into contact with a offload first mindset, going into contact trying to break the line first. I think that's a big thing for Terrell May that he still needs to work on in his game. But yeah, look, for me, the Dogs would be a great fit, and if he can work on hitting the line a little bit harder, really trying to break through tackles and obviously generate good contact, I think that he could be a real lethal player over at the Dogs. Dogs would be one. I think that a Panthers signing would be a little bit of a, controversial one that not many people are thinking about. Obviously, they've just lost James Fisher-Harris over there as well. So getting a guy like Terrell May in to replace a guy like JFH would be absolutely insane. It'd be a great signing. As I said, it'd be one that not a lot of people would have thought of too. But I think that Terrell May to the Panthers, I know that his brother's obviously been there before. Both of his brothers have been at the Panthers before as well. I think that he was in there when he was quite young in that system. Obviously then going to the Tigers and then to the Roosters. But yeah, Terrell May going to the Panthers, I think would be a really, really nice deal. Panthers, Storm, one of those two clubs I think would be great for Terrell May. But yeah, the Dogs for me just seems like the most likely one. Even though we had those sour negotiations, I think everyone deserves a second chance, and you never know, the second time around he might be very attractive to the Dogs and they might go ahead and sign him. There's a lot of clubs that could go for a guy like Terrell May, and I think that every club would love to have a Terrell May in their side. But for me, Dogs, Panthers, Storm would be unreal signings for Terrell May, and I think that's where he'd grow most as a player as well. The next player I've got on this list is Clint Gutherson. Now, it sounds like before we, delve into where he could suit, we don't really even need to do that because it sounds like the Dragons deal is a done deal. He's going to sign with the Dragons on a 3-year deal, pending, obviously, the medical, which I'm sure that he'll get through. But, we saw what happened with COC Takiaho. We saw what happened with Ronald Volkman and the medicals over there at the Dragons. So anything could happen there with Clint Gutherson, but pending that medical is passed, it sounds like he's going to sign a 3-year deal to play fullback over there at the Dragons. Now, while I disagree that he probably should be playing fullback, I think that he should be playing in the number 6 jersey. Obviously, Shane Flanagan's come out and confirmed that he will be playing in that fullback role. Taking Tyrell Sloan's spot, as I said, while I don't agree with it, Gutho is a great quality fullback. He's so good in that fullback jersey, so valuable, and it's his best position by far. So I can understand why they put him into that fullback jersey for the next few years until obviously he, hangs up the boots and they can bring Tyrell Sloan back into that position, or you'd think that'd be the case. But Gutho, it sounds like the Dragons is a done deal, but he obviously is still off contract at the moment, obviously pending that medical. Ben Hunt, speaking about the Dragons, obviously let go there effective immediately as well to seek a deal with another club. It sounds like with Ben Hunt that the two head honchos, I guess, in the race for Ben Hunt, or, the clubs that have verbally said that they're interested, is the Dolphins initially. And Christian Wolf obviously would love to have a guy like Ben Hunt and just add a bit of experience into that spine, particularly with a guy like Isaiah Katoa just to develop his game. I think that Ben Hunt could be a great mentor over there with him. But the Dolphins have obviously expressed interest. The Broncos have now expressed interest as well via Madge Maguire to the media yesterday. Obviously came out and said that he'd love to have discussions with Ben Hunt post that Kangaroos tour. Ben Hunt, if you didn't know as well, had to actually get an exemption to continue to represent the Kangaroos, since technically he hasn't got a contract with the NRL at the moment or the Super League. So he is a free agent. There are a few little mini rules that you might not have known about, which can affect Ben Hunt's ability to play for the Kangaroos. He had to get an exemption, I believe, today to be able to continue to represent the Kangaroos, even though he hasn't got any game time yet. He still had to get that exemption. But yeah, Broncos and Dolphins, they're the only two clubs at the moment that have verbally said that they would love to sign Ben Hunt, or that they will start discussions with Ben Hunt post him coming back from Kangaroos duties. I think, gun to head, he probably ends up at the Broncos. He's even come out and said that he'd love to finish his career there. So it sounds like Broncos is going to be the fit for him. Him under Madge as well is going to be very interesting, and just how that dynamic works. Obviously, a guy that has had a little bit of beef with Shane Flanagan, who seems to be a very tough, disciplined coach. Madge Maguire's sort of the same build, I guess, in regards to coaches. So that dynamic's going to be interesting there over at the Broncos. But it sounds like the Broncos might be the landing spot for Ben Hunt. He goes over there and most likely plays in the number 9 jersey, potentially pushing Billy Walters to 14. Or vice versa, Ben Hunt might play in that 14 role. The only reason I don't like him going to the Broncos is because they've got a guy called Blake Moser who they've held back enough. He had some great game time towards the back end of last season, or this season past, and looks exceptional. So I don't really see how it's fair to push out Billy Walters, or to even take out a guy like Blake Moser out of this team, who is the future there at 9. Billy Walters is 30. Ben Hunt's in his mid-30s now as well. So I just don't see how it's fair, or how it's, reasonable, and particularly looking into their future, to get him out of the side, for a guy that is in his mid-30s that's going to be retiring over the next 2 to 3 years, 2 years probably, Ben Hunt. But Broncos, it does sound like that's where he wants to finish up, so we'll have to wait and see. I think it's also, good. It really does depend where he plays on this Ezra Mam situation. It does sound like it's quite serious, and we won't comment on it too much on the podcast, but what we will say is that depending on how that situation plays out, maybe Ben Hunt goes over there as a 6, and it's a Ben Hunt and Adam Reynolds combination. Probably one of the older combinations you could have, but you could do a lot worse than having both of those in your halves, and that really does depend on the Ezra Mam situation, which again we won't comment too much on. I prefer him going to the Dolphins. I think that with his comments, with Madge's comments, it does sound like maybe the Broncos is going to be the fairy tale ending for Ben Hunt to go over there and try and win a competition. Josh Addo-Carr, it sounds like Parramatta could be the landing spot for him. He's had meetings with Jason Riles yesterday. So obviously, depending on what happened in those meetings, could very much depend on where he does end up in at 2025. We were very, very keen on him going to the Dragons, or at least a lot of people were keen on him and quite sure that he was going to sign with the Dragons. Obviously, the Dragons came out and said that they'd be more keen, or their priority at the moment is to sign Clint Gutherson before they go ahead and sign Josh Addo-Carr. So maybe Josh Addo-Carr's seen that, doesn't want to sit around. He wants to get into preseason. He's spoken with the Eels. I know that there is one fan of mine. Look, take this with a grain of salt. There was a fan of mine that hit me up in the DMs whose brother is friends with Josh Addo-Carr, and it sounds like Parramatta, Josh Addo-Carr is going to be a happy marriage, but we'll have to wait and see. Parramatta, St. George. For me, Penrith, I think, would be a good landing spot for Josh Addo-Carr. I know, obviously, they lose Sania Taruva, and Brian Toto has sort of migrated into a right winger, or at least at the back end of the season, he sort of migrated over to that right wing. So maybe Josh Addo-Carr does go over to the Panthers for 1 or 2 years, sits on that left wing, and they obviously have a lot of success there with him on the sting. That would be insane to see Josh Addo-Carr over there at the Panthers. You're getting a bit of experience there in the back line as well. They've tended to have a very young side over the past few years. So getting a bit of experience back in the team as well with a guy like Josh Addo-Carr on the wing would be very interesting. But yeah, that would be my top 3 probably. Dragons, Parramatta, and then the Panthers in regards to where he would actually fit in as well. Tommy Weaver. Now, these are the sort of guys that you might not know about that are currently off contract. Tommy Weaver from the Gold Coast Titans. Obviously, Tanner Boyd has obviously already gone and signed with the Warriors. I think I might be breaking records here for how many times I can say the word obviously, but it does sound like Tanner Boyd, or it does sound like he has signed with the Warriors. Throwing myself off a little bit here, a bit rattled. Tom Weaver. I think he'd be a great asset for a club. You look at his debut and his few games in first grade. Yes, the back end, that he's sort of been slotting into hooker and filling in at utility when he can. But those first 2 games, those are the ones that stand out to me. And the games in the trials, they stand out to me as well because he looked very, very good. And particularly in those first 2 games in first grade, he came up against the Melbourne Storm, which they nearly beat. And then they came up against the Panthers, which they nearly beat as well. It's the best they've looked against top sides with him in that number 7 jersey. Granted, it was a full team effort for both of those games as well, but he just looked so comfortable in the 7 there. I really do like Tom Weaver. I'll rate him very highly. I think that he could be a great asset for a club looking for a 7. There aren't too many young 7s going around that you can build a club around. Tom Weaver, for me, is one of those guys. As I said, I rate him very highly. We've talked about him for the past 2 years on the podcast, just rapping him and saying how good he could actually be. For me, I think his best landing spots would be 1, the Roosters. They need halves depth. Their halves depth at the moment is Chad Townsend. That's the only other half they have other than Sam Walker and Sandon Smith. I think they need to get a guy like Tom Weaver in that squad. It'd be great to have him as depth, particularly if Sam Walker is sniffing around Origin duties, which I think that he could definitely be sniffing around getting into that Queensland squad post how he comes back from that ACL injury. But I think that Roosters would be a great landing spot for Tom Weaver to maybe fill in if there is injury or, particularly at the start of the year where you could have Sandon Smith out, pending what happens with these off-field issues. You could have Sam Walker out, obviously, for the first few rounds recovering from that ACL. Tom Weaver would be a great get. You have Tom Weaver and Chad Townsend in the halves for the first few weeks, pending if Sandon Smith is available. But regardless, Tom Weaver's a great young guy you could have. And even if it's just as depth, I think it'd be a great signing for the Roosters. The Bulldogs, I think that they do need a little bit of halves depth as well. They've only really got Drew Hutchison. They lost Joash Papali'i to the Parramatta Reels. At the top of my head, I can't really think of too many other halves in that system at the moment. The starters are obviously Toby Sexton, Sexty Sexton there alongside Matt Burton. They've got Bailey Hayward, who's migrated more into a lock. They've got Drew Hutchison, but at the moment, that's really all that I can think of at the top of my head in regards to their halves depth. So I think that going over to the Dogs would be nice for Tommy Weaver just to play as a bit of a depth role over there. And then the Cowboys as well. Obviously, they don't have too many halves in their squad at the moment to take over from guys like Clifford or Tom Dearden when he goes over to Origin, with Chad Townsend getting out of that side. I think that Tom Weaver would really sit nicely in their squad as well. And as I said, he's just a great guy to have in your team as depth in the number 7 there. I think that he has the ability to play first grade in the number 7. I don't think he's 100% ready to take that full-time role, but I think that's exactly why he'd be great just sitting in one of these systems, the Roosters, the Dogs, or the Cowboys. For me, they're my top 3 for Tommy Weaver. I think he'd suit all of those very, very well. Let me know in the comment section, guys, if you think there's any other clubs where any of these guys could fit in that I haven't mentioned here as well. Marion Seve. A lot of people wouldn't have known that he'd be off contract at the back end of the year. He is a veteran. He's 29, 30 years old, so he has been around for a little while. Melbourne, they do love to keep these guys in the back line for pretty much their entire careers and just sit them in there from when they're young all the way to when they are, in that peak of their power sort of stage. Marion Seve is one. Obviously, young Tonamapia is another one that he is just sitting in that squad at the moment, aging like fine wine and coming in when they've got injuries. But Marion Seve, I think, is definitely one that should be sought out. He is currently off contract. The Melbourne Storm haven't signed him up yet. I don't think they are going to sign him up yet. I'd hate to see him go over to the Super League. I think he's a great depth outside back. He brings experience into your squad as well, and he does very well every time he comes in. Every time he comes in, he plays to about a 6 or a 7 out of 10, which is and the fact that he keeps that consistent, I think, is a great thing, especially when you've got players out with injury. To have an experienced guy that can play it around that 6 to 7 out of 10 range, I think is not a bad thing at all. The top 2 clubs for me, just going through the ladder before these podcasts and picking out these clubs, I really do think the Roosters, obviously, they've got to fill a spot with right centre. Depending on Mark Nwangatase's development, if they just want to have the start of the year, Marion Seve sits at right centre. They develop the young Mark Nwangatawa, in New South Wales Cup at centre and just let him learn that position, obviously throughout the preseason, but then a few games in New South Wales Cup at the start of the year. And then obviously he comes in a little bit later, around 5, 6, 7, 8. You see Mark Nwangatawa come into that number 4 sort of role in the centres there at right centre. But Marion Seve, I think, would be a nice little temporary option there, and then obviously can come in and play depending on if there's injury in the outside backs, or obviously if you've got guys going to play Origin, he can come in and slot into the back line as well. So, for me, Roosters would be a great, great club for him to land at, particularly for the reason I just said, developing Mark Nwangatawa in the centres. And then the Warriors, their centre depth at the moment is pretty light. They've got Ali Leatua, but at the moment, that's about it in regards to their outside backs. They've got a lot of forwards, a few halves, but they haven't actually got more than one centre, out-and-out centre in the depth list there or in the rest of their squad. So Marion Seve, again, a bit of experience. If someone goes down, you're getting a bit of experience in that Warriors side. I wouldn't think it'd be a bad pickup, and he's a guy that you can sign on minimum as well and get the best out of him in those times where you do need someone to come in if there's injury. So Roosters or Warriors for me would be the 2 top ones for Marion Seve. Zach Docker-Clay, for me, any club looking for an experienced utility, and I honestly think any club could, utilize having a Zach Docker-Clay in their squad. What you get out of Zach Docker-Clay is you get that experience. He's a journeyman. He's been around a bunch of systems. Penrith, he's been to the Dogs, obviously to the Roosters. He's been to a number of clubs. He's been in a number of systems under a number of different coaches as well. What you get out of that journeyman experience, I think, is so valuable. He always plays well. He can play in the halves. He can play at lock. He can play at hooker. He can cover a number of positions if there's injury. I can't believe the Roosters haven't kept him on for a little bit longer. I wouldn't be shocked if they do try and lock him up on a little bit of a lesser deal. But certainly, I think a lot of clubs should be going after Zach Docker-Clay. I think that he would be great for any squad. I can't pinpoint a club where he'd be best suited to, but what I will say is that all 17 clubs, as I said, could use a guy like Zach Docker-Clay, pending they've got that spare spot in their squads to have a guy like him in there. And then Aavalu Larti, a real young front rower we got to see for Melbourne make his debut and had an absolute blinder, particularly in the last few minutes of his stint. He was outstanding, an absolute wrecking ball. Played the last 20 minutes of that game, I believe. That was also when Lazarus was playing his second or third game. I think his second game there, Lazarus. Lazarus obviously scored a try through the middle, and then this guy, Big Larti, scored a try on the edge. Can play edge or middle, really big body, aggressive, just that young mongrel that we've been talking about for a number of clubs that a number of clubs need. And speaking of a number of clubs needing this guy, I've got the Panthers, the Roosters, the Rabbitohs, the Storm to re-sign him. I've got the Bulldogs, the Knights, and the Dragons, all as my top spots for an Aavalu Larti. Obviously came through the Panthers system, going back there. I believe he was on loan to the Melbourne Storm for the remainder of his contract. I believe that's why he was over there. But Panthers, for me, going back to that system and being that mongrel off the bench would be great. It's almost like having another Spencer Leniu. He isn't a Spencer Leniu by any trade, but just that aggression can also come on an edge, so it adds that versatility. But just has a real impact and a physical presence off the bench, which I think would be really nice for that Panthers pack. Roosters, I'd love to see them add another forward to their stocks. Obviously, losing Terrell May, they have that spot free for another young mongrel front rower. Even just to develop him in the lower grades and then bring him in, I think would be great for the Roosters. Rabbitohs, obviously, they do need forwards. They need those young mongrels. He'd be unreal at the Rabbitohs. Melbourne Storm, as I said, if they re-sign him, that'd be great, just on a really, really low deal, just to come on and obviously fill in bench spots if they need him in the pack. The Dogs, I'd love to see him at the Dogs. I think he'd suit that pack very, very well. Adding a bit of size to that pack, you're not necessarily having to go for Terrell Mays and those big money forwards. You can just get a guy like Aavalu Larti and then spend that money elsewhere, pending, obviously, if they want to get Ryan Pappenhausen maybe. They can spend that money there rather than on a Terrell May or a Leo Thompson. I think that'd be a really nice little fit there. In regards to the other two clubs, I've got the Knights and the Dragons here. I think the Knights would be a great fit for him. Obviously, they need some forwards too. They lost Daniel Saifidi, so that spot is open to get a young mongrel with a bit of size. They've got Matty Croker on the bench at the moment, who doesn't have a big presence. He does well every time he comes onto the field, but their pack does seem to be a little bit smaller. They do lack some front rowers. So I think that Knights would be good. And then Dragons, they've been trying to get a front rower for ages. They've been trying to spend money on a forward, a key forward for ages. They went for Aden Fanua-Blake. They went for Fisher Harris in that brief period where he was negotiating and getting that early release. They went for a number of forwards that were off contract and obviously re-signed with their clubs or went elsewhere. The Dragons, I think, just not having to spend too much money on a guy like Aavalu Larti. You get him on minimum. You could even have him on a development deal, depending on what you want to do there. But I think that he'd be an asset for so many clubs. Those ones being the top ones, and then a guy that you might not have realised has come into the open market here at the end of 2024. But Tom Eisenhuth from the Dragons has come on. He is available for next year. Hasn't been re-signed yet by the Dragons. I don't know what's happened there. He was really good and filled a role for them for the majority of 2024. Playing that lock forward role, did very, very well. It really just went over my head, the fact that this guy was off contract. It is absolutely insane that they've let him go. Really, really great front rower. A lot of upside to Tom Eisenhuth. Can also play in that lock forward role, which he killed it at. I think the Dolphins, because that they love an aging pack there and an experience in their pack at the Dolphins. It's a very Wayne Bennett thing. And look, to be honest, South Sydney could be a club where Tom Eisenhuth on a low deal could end up as well. The Dolphins, for me, would be one that he ends up at, just playing a bit of, 13 off the bench or something like that, or even just playing in New South Wales Cup. And then the Bulldogs. I think that the Bulldogs could use a guy like Tommy Eisenhuth. He does have a bit of size. He's also 32 years of age, so he does have a lot of experience too. But I think that the Bulldogs and the Dolphins would be my top two. Rabbitohs, depending on what they want to do there. They've got a fucking plethora of back rowers at the moment, so maybe they don't need a Tommy Eisenhuth, but if you're going to play him in the middle, maybe he is someone with a bit of experience you can knock on the door to. But in saying that, they probably want to go for maybe more younger forwards rather than a Tommy Eisenhuth. And then speaking of some veterans that are, in the open market at the moment and heavily discussed of late after his Fiji performances, Tane Milne. We've got to start a petition to get Tane Milne a contract. He has to have a contract because it is absolutely insane that he hasn't been signed up yet. I hope he doesn't go to the Super League. I think he'd be a great asset as a jersey 17. He can come on in the back row. He can come on at lock. He can come on in the middle forwards and just get a bit of leg speed generated through the middle. If there's injuries in your side, he can go into the outside backs and centre or winger and do a job for you as well. He can play in the back row. He can just cover so many roles for you. So just as that jersey 17, absolutely anywhere. If I had to pick a top three, the Gold Coast Titans would be one. Just contrasting from Regan Campbell-Gillard, Tino, Dave Fafita, Mo Fodawaker, Jamin Joel. If you've got a very large pack, just contrasting from that a little bit. They've lost Aaron Clark. Getting a guy like Tane Milne, who's a bit smaller, a bit more mobile, I think would be very, very advantageous. The Tigers, I think, would be great. A great signing for Tane Milne. Just an absolute mongrel coming off the bench there and creating havoc. Can also slot into that back row spot left by Isaiah Papali'i as well if you want to. And then the Melbourne Storm, I think going over there, being in that system, being a bit more of an experienced outside back rower in that jersey 17, can play in reserve grade for a little bit for the Bears. And then when they need him, he can come in and play some footy as well. But Melbourne Storm would be in there as well for me for Tane Milne landing spots. But I think, as I said, he could be a jersey 17 anywhere. I hope an NRL club picks him up because I'd hate to see him go off to the Super League next season. But there you go, guys. Those are your current top free agents that are available to negotiate for next year right now. Let me know out of any of these guys who would be your top priority for your club to sign. Who would you like to sign at your club? Let me know in the comment section below. We'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure you subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next one.